My name is Amelia Carter. I still remember the sound of glass breaking that night. It was sharp and clean, like the moment the world stops breathing. It started at the dinner table, the same table my father once bought for my 10th birthday, back when this penthouse felt safe. Now the air inside my home was heavy. The walls were closing in. Across from me sat my stepfather, Robert Kane, calm in a way that scared me. To his right, my mother, Linda Carter, holding a glass of white wine, like she was pretending this was just another family dinner. Beside her, my half-brother Derek leaned back with his usual smirk. A stranger in a dark suit sat at the end of the table, flipping through a stack of papers. He was Robert's lawyer. Linda spoke first, her voice almost gentle. "Amelia, sweetheart, you know how much this family means to me. This house has always been special, but things change. One day you'll get married and move on. It makes sense that the penthouse stays with the family." With Derek? My stomach tightened. I knew where this was going. Robert leaned forward, his fingers tapping the table like a ticking clock. "It's time you did the right thing," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced the same voice he used to talk investors into bad deals. The lawyer slid the papers across the table. I didn't need to read the headline to know what it said. Transfer of ownership. The penthouse. My father's gift. The only thing in my life that was mine. I felt my hands grow cold as the pen rolled to a stop in front of me. I looked at my mother. "This is my home." She avoided my eyes. "It's still your home." "But Derek is family too. We just want to make things official." Robert's lips curved slightly. "Sign it, Amelia. This doesn't have to be complicated." Derek's laugh was quiet, but it slid across the room like a blade. "You should be grateful we're letting you stay here at all." The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I pushed the papers away. "No." Robert's fingers stopped tapping. Something in his face shifted. The fake calm cracked. "No." His voice lowered like a warning. I stood up my chair, scraping against the polished floor. "I'm not signing anything." Derek snorted. "She thinks Daddy's going to save her." "How cute." Linda's voice came out small, tired. "Amelia, please. Just sign it and let's stop fighting." I turned to her. "You're really choosing them over me." She didn't answer. Robert rose slowly from his chair. He was a big man, not muscular, but heavy, the kind of man who'd always filled a room without trying. He stepped closer, and I felt every nerve in my body scream. I backed away. "Amelia," he said softly, like a lie. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I took another step back. "Get out of my way!" And then everything happened at once. His hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of my hair. The edge of the glass table came up fast and pain exploded across my forehead. The sound of glass shattering filled the room. My knees buckled. Warm blood slid down the side of my face. The world tilted blurry lights, swallowing the edges of the room. My mother's voice cut through it sharp and bitter. "Why didn't you just sign it?" I hit the floor, the cold marble pressing against my cheek. Derek's shoes creaked against the tile as he walked closer. He looked down at me with that same smirk. "You should have listened." Somewhere beyond the ringing in my ears, a neighbor pounded on the door. A woman's voice shouted, "I'm calling 911." Robert cursed under his breath. I heard the sound of a door slam. He was leaving. My mother didn't run to me. She just stood there frozen, clutching her wine glass. Derek disappeared down the hall. Sirens, the distant echo of them growing louder. I tried to move my hand to my head, but everything felt heavy, as if gravity had tripled. I could smell iron from my own blood, sharp and metallic. The front door burst open. A paramedic's voice reached me like it was underwater. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" "Stay with me." A flashlight cut across my vision. Hands lifted my head gently, wrapping it with something warm and tight. The paramedic shouted toward the hallway. "She's bleeding from the scalp. We need to get her to the ER." As they carried me out on the stretcher, I caught a glimpse of Linda. She was standing in the corner of the living room, her face, pale eyes wide, but she still said nothing. She didn't come with me. She didn't even look at me properly. That silence burned worse than the wound on my head. The hallway lights blurred into streaks as they rushed me to the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. Sirens wailed. I pressed my bloody hand against the blanket they had laid over me and whispered to no one. He hit me. He really hit me. The paramedic leaned over me. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name, Amelia?" I whispered. "Amelia, you're going to be okay. We're almost there." The ER doors opened with a harsh metallic hiss. Bright white lights stabbed into my vision. Cold air. The smell of antiseptic. A nurse clipped something to my finger. Someone shouted numbers I couldn't understand. The world spun in streaks of white and red. I closed my eyes for a second, and in that darkness I thought of my father. The last time I saw him, he had said, "No one will ever take that home from you." A voice pierced through the noise. Male, deep, controlled. I knew it before I opened my eyes. "Where is he?" I turned my head weakly. My father stood in the ER hallway. David Carter. Dark coat. Cold eyes. For the first time since the table shattered, I felt something solid inside me again. Not safety, not yet, but something close. The nurse said something to him, but I couldn't hear it. The beeping of the monitor filled the room like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. My head throbbed, but my chest felt warm at the sound of his voice. Everything else faded. All I could hear was my father repeating, "Where is he?" over and over. In that moment, lying under the ER lights, I knew this wasn't over. Robert thought he had power. He thought I was alone. He was wrong. My name is Amelia Carter. And that night, everything broke. I was 10 years old the day my father handed me the key to the penthouse. The world seemed bigger, then warmer, simpler. It was a fall afternoon in Chicago, the kind where the sky is pale and the air smells like crisp leaves. My father, David Carter, knelt down beside me, the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. He held a small brass key in his hand, polished and shining like a secret. "This will always be yours," he said. He didn't say it dramatically, didn't make a big speech. He just said it the way a father promises his daughter something sacred. I believed him with every bone in my body. Back then, this place smelled like him. Strong coffee in the mornings, leather, and old books, the faint cologne he always wore. It was our world. My world. He had just finalized the divorce with my mother, but he smiled at me that day, promising everything would still be okay. I didn't understand much about lawyers or property then, but I understood the look in his eyes. He meant it. That key was my anchor. After the divorce, I lived with my mother because she said I needed a stable routine. At first, nothing seemed to change, but slowly, piece by piece, everything shifted. The house was still mine, but the warmth of it started leaking out like air from a balloon. My mother was still my mother, but she wasn't the same woman I grew up with. When she met Robert Kane, I remember the way she laughed at his jokes at the dinner table in some downtown restaurant. I was 12 then, and I didn't like the way he looked at me. Not in a cruel way, just dismissive. Like I was an obstacle, a child who didn't fit into his plans. He moved into our lives slowly, like a shadow that doesn't make a sound. The first thing he did when they got married was change things in the penthouse. He called it remodeling. My father's leather couch disappeared. The paintings he gave me were moved to a closet. Robert hung up photographs of himself and my mother. It wasn't my home anymore. It was theirs. And then came Derek, my half-brother. He was born when I was 14. The moment he entered the world, the house stopped being my father's house and became his cradle. I don't remember my mother smiling at me much after he was born, but I do remember how she beamed at Derek. She said things like, "He'll inherit everything one day," while brushing his soft baby hair. I was standing in the hallway listening. I remember how those words hit me. They weren't even whispered. She said them like I didn't matter. I kept the key to the penthouse on a thin chain around my neck. I used to touch it when they talked about Derek's future. It was my reminder. It was mine. But the more the years passed, the more I felt like an unwanted guest. My friends from school never really came over because Robert hated noise. If I sat in the living room to do homework, Robert would clear his throat loudly until I left. If I cooked something in the kitchen, my mother would complain I was making a mess. Everything I did was wrong. Derek, though, could scream, run brake plates, throw tantrums, and no one said a thing. I wasn't blind. I saw how my mother's face changed whenever he smiled, how Robert's hand rested on her shoulder like they were building a new family. And I wasn't part of it. When I turned 16, Robert stopped pretending to like me at all. One night, I came home from a late study group. The penthouse was lit up and the sound of their laughter spilled into the hallway before I opened the door. I walked in and saw them eating dinner together without me. A 4-person table, but only 3 plates. My seat was gone. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. I went to my room, shut the door, and touched the key hanging from my neck. I cried silently that night. I didn't want to let them see they were winning. At 17, I started working part-time at a small cafe, not for the money, but to have somewhere to go. Home didn't feel like home. It felt like a war zone where no one raised guns, but everyone made sure you knew you didn't belong. My mother stopped calling me Amelia at home. She started saying things like her when talking about me. She's selfish. She doesn't appreciate what she has. Robert fed those lines into her ear like poison. I could see it. But she believed him. When Derek was 12, my mother threw him a massive birthday party at the Penthouse. All his friends came. There were balloons, a huge cake, a magician. She never threw me a party like that. I spent the evening in my room listening to them celebrate in a house that used to be mine. The bitterness grew in me like a quiet, steady flame. I promised myself I would hold on to what was mine. The penthouse, the key. My father still called me. He didn't live in the city anymore, but he visited sometimes. Each time he'd say the same thing. That house is still yours. Don't ever forget it. I never did. But I also saw the way Robert's eyes darkened whenever he saw my father. He hated that this place was tied to another man. He hated that legally he couldn't touch it as long as I refused. That hatred simmered over the years hidden under fake smiles at family dinners. When my father gave me the key, I thought it was a symbol of belonging. But it turned out to be a line in the sand. Me on one side, them on the other. My mother crossed that line without hesitation. Robert built his kingdom on my father's floor. And Derek grew up believing it all belonged to him. I grew up with silence pressing against my chest, watching the home I loved transform into something unrecognizable. I was alone in my own house, clutching a brass key that had lost its shine but not its meaning. That key was the only proof left that I wasn't crazy, that once upon a time this was mine. And I swore, even as the years turned everything cold, that I would never let them take it from me. I had always known they wanted the penthouse, but the night they set the trap was the first time I realized how far they were willing to go. It was a Thursday late fall, the kind of night where the city lights below the balcony flickered like restless fireflies. Derek had just turned 20, and ever since his birthday, Robert had grown bolder. He no longer tried to mask his intentions behind polite smiles or fake concern. That evening, I walked into the living room to find my mother, Robert, and Derek already waiting for me. The air felt strange, staged like walking into a play where everyone had rehearsed their lines except me. The coffee table was cleared except for a sleek black folder placed right in the center. Next to it, 2 pens. A bottle of red wine had been opened. I could smell it from the doorway. Robert's smile was thin and calculated. "Amelia," he said smoothly, "come sit down. We need to talk like adults." I didn't move. My eyes landed on the folder. "What's that?" "Just paperwork," he replied. "Nothing scary. But it's time to make things official." My mother spoke next. Her tone was soft, but it was the kind of softness that cuts. "Amelia, honey, you're almost 30. You'll have your own place one day. The penthouse has always been a family home. You know how much it means to us." To Derek. Derek leaned back against the couch, arms spread wide like he already owned the place. "We just want to make sure things are in order. You know no legal complications in the future." My chest tightened. This wasn't new. They had hinted at this for years, but there was something different in the air tonight. This wasn't a conversation. This was a setup. I walked closer slowly until I stood by the coffee table. The black folder seemed to hum with quiet threat. Robert gestured at it like a salesman about to close a deal. "Inside is a simple transfer of ownership. All you have to do is sign, and the penthouse will be under the family's name. It's still your home, Amelia. Nothing really changes. Except legally it'll be secured for the future." I laughed once dry and bitter. "For the future?" I repeated. "You mean Derek's future. Robert's smile didn't falter. Derek is family. Your family. Why make this harder than it has to be? Derek chuckled. You're acting like anyone's taking something from you. You're still going to live here at least until you decide to marry some guy. Then you'll move out and we'll take care of the place. It makes sense. My mother reached forward and placed her hand on top of mine, but her fingers were cold. Amelia, you know your father doesn't even live here anymore. This place has been our home for years. Derek grew up here. I love you, but it's time to be realistic. Realistic. The word hung in the air like poison. Realistic meant they were done pretending. I pulled my hand back. This is my home. Legally, my father gave it to me. You can't just take it. Robert's voice dropped lower, smooth, but dangerous. We're not taking it. We're just ensuring it stays in the family. But if you want to make things difficult, that can be arranged too. I have lawyers. You know that. My heart pounded against my ribs. I knew exactly what he meant. He had spent years slowly tightening control around my mother, their finances, their influence. He had connections. He was used to winning by intimidation. Derek smirked like a spoiled prince watching his subjects kneel. It's going to be mine eventually anyway. We're just skipping the boring legal stuff. My mother didn't even flinch at his words. She had chosen her side a long time ago. I stared at the pen resting on top of the folder. For a moment, I thought of my father's voice the day he gave me the key. This will always be yours. It echoed in my head like a warning bell. No, I said quietly. Derek tilted his head. What? No, I repeated louder this time. Robert's fingers drummed against the armrest. You're being childish, Amelia. You don't want this to get messy. This can end clean. One signature. No fighting, no headlines. But if you refuse, I promise you it won't stay clean. My jaw clenched. You think you can bully me into giving you my father's house? His expression sharpened. I don't think. I know. Derek laughed again, low and mean. You're just a guest here, Amelia. Always have been. The room tilted slightly as the heat built behind my eyes. This was it. Years of tension were boiling over. Every time my mother chose Derek over me. Every time Robert changed something in this house. Every quiet moment where I felt invisible. All of it led to this night. I'm not signing anything I said. Robert leaned forward slowly, elbows on his knees, like a hunter circling its prey. You will. Sooner or later, because we both know you're alone here. I felt the air leave my lungs. Alone. That was the word that had followed me my entire life inside this house. Derek shifted, crossing his legs like he was watching a show he'd already seen the ending to. My mother turned her face away, and that was somehow worse than anything Robert could have said. I didn't sign. I walked away, but their laughter followed me down the hall. I heard Robert whisper something I wasn't supposed to catch. She'll break eventually. He was wrong. I wasn't going to break. Not this time. Not ever. The night it finally happened, the tension in the air was so thick it felt like breathing through broken glass. It was 3 days after the signature trap. I had been sleeping poorly, listening to the echo of Robert's voice promising that I would break. He was wrong. Every time I touched the small brass key around my neck, I reminded myself why I had to hold my ground. But standing in the living room that night, facing 3 people who had spent years treating me like an intruder in my own home, I realized they were done waiting. The penthouse smelled like expensive whiskey. Robert sat in his usual chair, his wide frame slouched but his eyes sharp. Derek leaned against the kitchen counter, twirling a lighter between his fingers. My mother stood near the window, arms crossed, pretending she wasn't part of what was about to happen. She didn't meet my eyes. That told me everything. We need to end this, Robert said, finally, his voice heavy. You've had time to think, and you're going to do the smart thing tonight. I laughed under my breath, a sound that came out shaky but strong enough to mask my racing pulse. The smart thing would be you leaving this house. Derek smirked. It's not your house, Amelia. You've just been squatting here until Dad figures out a way to take it back. My jaw locked. It's not his house either. It's mine. My father gave it to me. Robert stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He always liked making himself bigger in the room, using his size as a weapon. Your father gave you something you didn't earn, and now it's time for someone who actually belongs here to take over. My hands curled into fists, my pulse hammering against my wrists. No one's taking anything from me. My mother's voice finally cut through the tension, quiet and brittle. Amelia, please, just sign the papers. Why are you making this so hard? I turned to her. Because this isn't yours to give away. Her shoulders stiffened. Derek flicked his lighter open and shut the sound, filling the silence like a countdown. You know, he said casually, this would be so much easier if you stopped pretending you have a choice. I took a step forward. I do have a choice. Robert's eyes darkened. Then make it now. Or don't blame me for what happens next. I felt it before I saw it. That shift in the room like a wire pulled too tight. He was no longer trying to intimidate me with words. This time he wanted to make me afraid in a way I wouldn't forget. I shook my head slowly. I'm not signing anything. The veins in his neck tightened. He moved fast. One moment he was 3 feet away, the next he had crossed the room. His hand grabbed my wrist and twisted. Pain shot up my arm. I gasped but held his stare. He hated that. You think this house protects you? He growled, his breath hot and sour against my face. But it doesn't. I do. Derek laughed like it was a show. My mother didn't move. She didn't even flinch. She just stood there watching as his grip tightened. Let me go, I hissed. Or what? He snapped. I yanked my hand free, stumbling back against the edge of the dining table. It was the same table from the night he shoved my head into the glass. My heart slammed against my ribs, but something in me refused to back down. You don't scare me anymore, I said quietly. You should be scared, he whispered. His hand came down again, this time a fist connecting with my cheekbone so hard my head snapped sideways. Pain bloomed across my face, hot and dizzying. The world tilted. My hand slammed into the table to steady myself. Derek's laughter echoed through the room. I told you she'd fold. I didn't fall. Not this time. The shock burned through my body, clearing the fog in my head. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand and stared at him. You're a coward. His face twisted into something ugly, something he had probably kept hidden for years. Say that again, coward. The second hit came faster than the first. This time I went down my hip, crashing against the marble floor. A vase shattered somewhere behind me, the sound sharp and distant. My ears rang, but I could hear my mother shouting, Robert, stop! Her voice cracked, but she didn't move toward me. She never did. Derek kept laughing, the sound cruel and bright. Robert towered over me, chest heaving, his fists clenched. He wasn't pretending anymore. This was who he really was. You did this to yourself, he said. All you had to do was sign. I forced myself onto my elbows, breathing hard. My vision swam, but the rage inside me burned steady. I will never give you this house. His boot came down near my shoulder, a warning more than a strike. Then you're going to regret it. I could taste blood in my mouth, metallic and warm. I could hear movement from the hallway outside, the low murmur of neighbors. Someone had heard the shouting. Good. Let them. Robert turned toward the sound, cursing under his breath. He didn't want police involved. He didn't want witnesses. We're done, I said hoarsely. No, he answered without turning around. We're just getting started. Then the knock came. Hard, loud. Police, open up. Derek stiffened. Linda froze. Robert's head snapped toward the door like a cornered animal. I dragged myself up to a sitting position, my breath shaking, and spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. It felt like defiance. This is over, I whispered. He glared at me, his jaw tight, then stormed toward the back exit. I heard the door slam. Derek followed him without looking at me. My mother finally moved. She crouched down, but didn't touch me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but not for me. For him. For them. Not me. You shouldn't have made him angry, she whispered. I almost laughed. He hit me. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. She got up and hurried toward the hallway. I stayed there on the cold floor, blood dripping down my chin, my pulse loud in my ears. The door opened and 2 officers stepped inside. One knelt down beside me, speaking gently. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" The other scanned the room. I nodded slowly. He hit me. My voice was hoarse, raw, but steady. The officer called for an ambulance. The other took a statement from the neighbors who had gathered in the hall. Robert was gone by the time they checked the back stairs. I didn't care. The damage was done. My mother lied when they asked her what happened. She fell, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. I looked at her and saw a stranger. They put me on the stretcher, and as the paramedics wheeled me down the hall, I pressed my hand against the brass key around my neck. It dug into my palm, sharp and real. He thought he could break me, but all he did was light the fuse. The first thing I remember was the light. Cold, white, unforgiving. It burned through my eyelids before I could open them, buzzing faintly like every hospital light always does. My head pounded in waves that rolled through my skull, each one sharper than the last. My tongue was thick with the taste of blood. There were voices around me, blurred and distant at first. A woman's voice. BP's stable. She's waking up. Another firmer, a man. Let's get the CT just in case. Head trauma like this can escalate fast. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the brightness until the world stopped spinning long enough to focus. A nurse leaned over me, adjusting something near my IV. Her face was calm, practiced. She'd probably seen 1,000 versions of this moment before. "Amelia, can you hear me?" I nodded weakly, even though every movement sent needles of pain shooting through my skull. The beeping of the monitor beside me matched the rhythm of my heartbeat, uneven and shallow. My throat was dry. I tried to speak, but it came out cracked. "Where am I? ER?" "You're at Northwestern Memorial," she said gently. "You've got a deep cut on your forehead, some bruising. We've stabilized you. You're safe. Safe." The word didn't feel real. Safety had stopped existing the second Robert's hand came down on my face. I turned my head slightly and winced as pain bloomed. My hair was sticky with dried blood. The ceiling above me was too white, too still. It didn't smell like home. It smelled like antiseptic and metal. The nurse adjusted my blanket. "Your mother is outside," she added almost like an afterthought. Something inside me clenched. Of course she was. She probably looked concerned to the doctors, maybe even tearful, the image of a worried parent. She was good at appearances, but she hadn't tried to stop him. She never did. A moment later, the curtain was pushed aside. She stepped in slowly, clutching her purse like it might save her. Linda Carter looked pale, her makeup slightly smudged. For a second, she almost looked like my mother again. "Almost, Amelia," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear of what Robert had done. Fear of what might happen next. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing down on my chest. She took a step closer. You shouldn't have pushed him like that. He doesn't like when people—" My laugh cut through the room, dry and bitter. "When people, what, breathe?" She flinched. I saw it. She didn't deny it, though. That was the worst part. She looked at the floor, fingers tightening on her purse strap. "You have to understand. He's under a lot of pressure. The house, the paperwork. This has been hard for everyone." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until she understood what she had let happen to me, but I was too tired, too hurt. "He hit me," I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a blade. She opened her mouth, closed it again. She couldn't even look at me. My heartbeat spiked, the monitor beeping faster. A nurse poked her head in, probably worried I'd flatline from sheer rage. My mother backed away toward the door. "You shouldn't have made him angry," she whispered, as if that explained everything. And then she left. Just like that. No apology, no comfort. Just a woman who loved a man more than her own daughter. The nurse came back to check my vitals, her expression unreadable but softer now. She'd heard every word. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her silence told me she understood. I stared at the ceiling, letting the buzzing lights blur into a white haze. My entire life had been leading up to this point. Years of small betrayals, quiet favoritism, the sound of Derek's laughter while I disappeared into corners of my own home. And now Robert had made it physical. He had crossed the last line. I thought that maybe this was the part where I would break, where I would finally give up the house, just to be free. But something else took root instead. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, harder. A sound broke through the stillness of the ER. Footsteps. Firm. Familiar. I didn't even need to see him to know. My father. David Carter. The curtain rustled, and then there he was. He didn't rush to me, didn't fall apart, didn't ask 100 questions. He just stood there in a black coat, hands at his sides, his jaw tight. His presence filled the room like gravity itself had shifted. The nurse instinctively stepped back. He moved toward the bed and leaned down, his eyes searching mine. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice low and steady the way it had always been when he was angry. The difference was when my father got angry, he didn't shout. He built storms quietly. I didn't have to say the name. He already knew. The bruises on my face, the blood, the look in my eyes told him everything. But I said it anyway. Robert. His jaw clenched. That was all. No ranting, no shock, just quiet, focused fury. He took my hand gently, his palm warm and steady against my cold fingers. "You're safe now," he said. This time the word felt different. He didn't mean I was safe because nothing would happen. He meant I was safe because something was going to happen to him. I stared at him, my voice barely a whisper. "He tried to take it, Dad. The house. Everything." My father exhaled through his nose. "He won't have it. He won't have anything." He straightened up and turned toward the nurse. "I want the incident report. Police involvement. Everything." His tone left no room for debate. He had always been like this in business, cold, efficient, terrifyingly calm. But I had never seen that side aimed at someone who hurt me. The nurse nodded. "Of course, sir." When she left the room, my father pulled out his phone. A few taps later, his voice was low and controlled as he gave instructions to someone on the other end. "I only caught fragments. Private investigator. Tonight. I want the full picture. Freeze any attempt at transfer. Immediately. He's not walking away from this." I felt a strange calm settle over me as I listened. This was my father at war, and Robert Kane had no idea who he had just picked a fight with. My eyelids grew heavy. The painkillers were kicking in. But before I drifted into the fog, my father leaned close again. "You don't have to fight this alone anymore," he said. I squeezed his hand weakly. "Don't let him win." "I won't," he promised. My mother never came back into the room. I didn't ask for her. Lying there under the fluorescent lights with the steady beep of the monitor echoing through the sterile air, I finally understood what I had always known but never said aloud. My mother had already chosen her side years ago, but now my father had chosen his too, and his side was mine. I closed my eyes and let the cold light fade into a dull blur. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but I knew something had shifted forever. Robert had drawn blood. My father was about to draw a line, and this time he would not let them cross it. When my father came back into my life that night at the ER, something in me shifted. I had spent years convincing myself I didn't need him, that I could hold the line alone against a house full of people who wanted me erased. But seeing him stand there in that black coat with that expression he always wore when someone had crossed a line, I realized I had been wrong. My father was not just a man with money. He was a man who built empires, crushed those who tried to steal from him, and never forgot a promise. And years ago, he had promised me no one would take that house away. I fell asleep that night to the sound of his low voice making calls not frantic or emotional, but calm and controlled. A storm that built itself brick by brick. When I woke up, sunlight was cutting across the hospital room, and he was still there. Not in the chair, standing, hands behind his back, phone in his pocket, looking like he was already 10 steps ahead of everyone. "Morning," I whispered, my voice rough from the night. His eyes softened just a fraction. "How's your head?" "It hurts," I said honestly. "But not as much as everything else." He nodded slowly, then leaned forward on the railing at the foot of my bed. "I've already spoken to the police. They filed the incident report last night. We'll be pressing charges. I swallowed hard. He'll lie. She'll lie too. They always do. I don't care, he said evenly. Robert Kane isn't my equal Amelia, and neither is his lawyer. He made a mistake, and I'm going to make sure he understands exactly how expensive that mistake is. His tone was so controlled, it almost scared me. He wasn't shouting or pacing. He was building something, a plan. Dad, I whispered. He hit me. It slipped out before I could stop it, quiet but sharp, and for a brief second I saw something flicker behind his calm exterior. A flash of fury, the kind of rage that doesn't burn fast but burns deep. I know, he said, and I will make sure he regrets it. He checked his watch. My legal team will be here in 20 minutes. They've already frozen all property transfer attempts on the Penthouse. I had the deed flagged years ago just in case. I stared at him. You did. He gave a small, cold smile. I know your mother. I knew this day would come. I just didn't expect him to get violent before the paperwork. I laughed bitterly, then winced as my head throbbed. He's always been like this. Just slower, more careful. Last night he didn't care anymore. Good, my father said. That means he made himself visible. People like Robert are dangerous when they hide in the shadows. Once they step into the light, they're easy to break. He stepped closer to my bed and lowered his voice. You don't have to say anything to him again. Not a word. I'll take it from here. I wanted to be strong, to tell him I didn't need saving, but the truth was I was tired. Tired of fighting alone. Tired of pretending I could carry everything on my own. So instead, I nodded slowly. Okay. A knock on the door interrupted us. A woman in a navy suit stepped inside, followed by a younger man with a laptop bag. I recognized the way they moved, calm and efficient. My father's people. Amelia, he said this is Helen Park. She's the lead attorney, and this is Miles, her associate. They'll be handling everything. Helen nodded once at me. Ms. Carter, we've already reviewed the deed and the attempted transfer documents. Robert Kane hired a lawyer named Charles Denton. We have a history with him. He's sloppy. We can destroy him. My father said nothing. He didn't need to. He had built an empire by surrounding himself with people who didn't waste time. Helen continued. We've also subpoenaed the building's security footage from last night. Your neighbors gave statements to the police. We have at least 2 witnesses who heard shouting and saw him leave. Miles opened his laptop and turned it toward me. I saw still frames of Robert storming down the hallway, his hand still clenched into a fist, blood on his knuckles. The timestamp matched the 911 call. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, they weren't just words against me. There was proof. My father's voice was low behind me. This is just the beginning. Helen straightened her blazer. We're also filing for a temporary restraining order. He won't be able to come near you or the Penthouse. And since the property is in your name, we can block any further legal maneuvering. But I assume we're not stopping there. My father's expression hardened. No, we're not. Helen nodded once. Then I'll prepare everything accordingly. They left with military precision, closing the door softly behind them. My father sat down finally, but even sitting, he carried the room like a general. I'm not going to let this drag out, he said. This isn't about just protecting the house anymore. He hurt you. He drew first blood. Now I will take everything from him. I stared at the clean white sheets bunched around my hands. Do you ever wonder if she'd pick me? If it was just me and him? He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally, because I stopped wondering about your mother a long time ago. That hurt more than I expected. But I knew he was right. She had made her choice years ago. She made it every day she let him stay in our lives, every time she let him push me further out of what was mine. A nurse came in to check my vitals, but I barely noticed. My father was already back on the phone giving quiet orders. I caught fragments. Freeze his accounts. Contact Internal Revenue. Make sure the press doesn't get there before we do. It wasn't revenge to him. It was strategy. Robert had picked the wrong person to hurt. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of my father turning my pain into a war plan. Later that day, a detective came by to take my official statement. My father sat silently beside me the entire time, his hand resting on the table like a promise. I told them everything: the papers, the fight, the hits. My mother standing there and doing nothing. The detective listened carefully, nodding as he wrote. "We already have statements from the neighbors," he said when I finished. "And your stepfather has priors. Nothing violent, but a history of financial fraud. This is going to help your case." I wasn't surprised. Robert Kane had always smelled like a man who cut corners. It was only a matter of time before it caught up to him. After the detective left, my father leaned back in his chair. "They're already weak. We just need to push once." "What if Mom tries to protect him?" I asked. His expression didn't change. "Then she falls with him." His words were sharp, final, like the crack of glass in my head the night Robert hit me. And yet, for the first time in so long, I felt something close to relief. It wasn't that everything was going to be easy. It was that I wasn't alone anymore. When night fell again, I was still in the hospital bed, but this time I wasn't scared. My father was by the window phone in hand, his voice calm but merciless. He was making sure that when Robert Kane tried to step back into his comfortable life, there would be nothing left to step into. Before I fell asleep, I whispered, "Thank you." He didn't look at me. He just said, "You're my daughter. There will be no more silence." The investigation began before I was even discharged from the hospital. My father didn't waste time, not a single hour. He had built his name on precision and timing, and now all that power was aimed in one direction: Robert Kane. By the third morning, my room no longer smelled like just antiseptic and cold air. It smelled like strategy. Lawyers came and went in quiet waves, carrying folders, laptops, files. I wasn't allowed to touch, but knew contained the pieces of Robert's downfall. My father was in the corner every day, phone pressed to his ear, giving orders to people who didn't ask questions. He didn't rage or pace. He planned, and planning was far more dangerous than anger. When Helen Park returned with her team, everything felt colder, sharper. She placed a thick black folder on my lap and opened it with surgical precision. "Ms. Carter, this is the financial trail we found in just 48 hours, she said. Miles pulled up a screen with bank statements and scanned documents. "Robert Kane has been moving money through shell accounts for years," Helen continued, "but what matters most is that he paid Charles Denton, his lawyer, months before any transfer attempt. They've been planning this for a long time." I stared at the lines of numbers. I didn't understand all the legal terms, but I understood betrayal. They hadn't just wanted the house. They'd been setting the trap long before I saw the papers on the table. My father spoke without looking up from his phone. "And the prosecutor," Helen nodded. "We have names. Robert made payments to a clerk in the county registrar's office to pre-file a transfer. He was going to use your mother as the signing witness. If they'd pulled it off, it would have taken years to untangle." My stomach twisted. They weren't just trying to pressure me. They were trying to erase me. Miles clicked on a different tab. It was a still image from the hallway security camera. Robert leaving the penthouse after he hit me. Blood still visible on his knuckles. The timestamp matched the 911 call. Then another frame, my mother standing in the doorway minutes later, wiping her face with a towel, looking around like she wanted to disappear. "This," Helen said, tapping the screen, "combined with your neighbor's testimonies is strong. But your father's investigator found more." As if on cue, a tall man in a dark suit stepped into the room. He moved like someone used to not being noticed until it mattered. His name was Victor Hale, one of my father's most trusted private investigators. He placed a thumb drive on the table and looked directly at me. "We found the drafts," he said, "emails between Robert and Charles Denton. He was planning to file the forged documents the day after the signing. It's all there, date stamps, attachments, his name on every single line." Helen smiled, a cold and satisfied thing. "Legally, this is enough to bury him." My father finally put his phone down and walked toward the table. "That's not enough," he said quietly. "I want everything." Victor didn't blink. "You'll have it." The next hours were a blur of facts that cut like knives. Payment records, emails, witness statements, security footage. Everything Robert thought was hidden was now laid bare in the cold light of evidence. They showed how he slowly funneled money, how he manipulated my mother, how he tried to stage a clean handoff of a property that was never his. My chest tightened as I watched, but not from fear, from something heavier. All those years I'd felt crazy paranoid alone. And here it was, the proof that I had been right all along. My father's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. It wasn't tender. It was grounding. "They thought you were alone," he said. That was their mistake. That evening, Victor returned with a voice recording. "This was taken from a call 2 weeks ago," he said. Robert was talking to Denton. He said, and I quote, "She'll sign. If she doesn't, I'll make her sign." The words sent a chill through me. I heard them once already in real life, but hearing them again recorded made it feel even more real. "We're handing this to the police," Helen said. "This isn't just civil anymore. This is criminal coercion and assault." My father didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence in the room was louder than anything else. By the 4th day, the detectives had everything they needed. I sat through formal statements repeating every detail of that night. I described the sound of the glass, the smell of his breath, the way my mother's silence hurt worse than his hands. The detective nodded and wrote it all down. But this time, unlike so many moments before, it wasn't just my word against theirs. They had witnesses. They had evidence. They had a man who finally made a mistake loud enough to be caught. Meanwhile, my father's team traced Robert's finances further. Victor stood by the window one afternoon, speaking quietly as he flipped through a document. "He's in debt," he said. "Deep. The shell companies were covering gambling losses and a few failed investments. If he had gotten the Penthouse under his name, he would have flipped it within weeks. He needed the cash fast." My hands went cold. "So this was never about the house," I whispered. "It was about the money." My father answered from behind me. "It's always about the money with people like him." Derek had known too. The recordings revealed messages between him and Robert talking about what to do when she's out. They joked about turning my room into a gym. They joked about erasing me like I was nothing. And my mother had sat at the same table as them, pretending not to hear. I didn't cry when I listened to it. I just sat still and let the anger settle into something solid, something steady. I had spent years trying to be the bigger person. Now, I was done. That night, my father gathered everyone in his private office at his firm downtown. It was past midnight, but no one was tired. The walls hummed with the weight of decisions. "Tomorrow," Helen said, "we file the restraining order and the assault charges. The forged document attempts go to the DA. Denton will try to cut a deal, but he'll throw Robert under the bus to save himself." My father stood by the window, the city lights behind him. "And the house," Miles answered quickly. "Already secured. There's no legal path left for him." My father nodded once. "Good. Then we move to exposure." Helen tilted her head. "Public." "Yes," my father said. "Quiet men like Robert need silence to survive. I'm going to take that away." I didn't fully understand his plan, but I didn't have to. I trusted him. I hadn't done that in a long time, but watching him work these past days reminded me why his enemies always lost. The next morning, detectives executed a search warrant on Robert's office. They found documents Denton had hidden in a locked cabinet. Contracts, notes, plans, a fake power of attorney form with my forged signature. My hand froze when Helen showed me the scanned copy. Seeing my name there written in a signature I didn't make made something inside me harden even more. "This is the nail in the coffin," Helen said. "He doesn't walk away from this." My father's voice behind me was quiet, but edged with steel. "He won't walk anywhere." By that night, Robert's carefully built empire was unraveling. Calls to his office went unanswered. One of my father's people confirmed the bank had frozen several accounts tied to the shell companies. Even his lawyer Denton was distancing himself. It was happening fast, and Robert didn't even know the full weight of what was coming. He had spent years thinking he was untouchable. Now the walls were closing in. I sat in my hospital bed that evening, my stitches itching under the bandage, my bruises yellowing along my jaw. I looked down at the small brass key resting against my collarbone. For years, it had been a reminder of everything I had lost. But now it was a reminder of what I was taking back. My father stepped into the room quietly and handed me a printed folder. Inside were copies of the official filings: restraining order, criminal complaint, property security documentation. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I nodded and he nodded back. The quiet understanding between us said everything. Robert Kane thought I was alone. But I wasn't alone anymore. And soon he was going to face everything he had tried to bury. The day everything came to light didn't arrive quietly. It came like a storm crashing through a glass wall. My father planned it with the same precision he built his empire. No shouting, no spectacle. Just a quiet certainty that when the trap closed, Robert Kane would have nowhere to run. The setting wasn't random either. Robert and his lawyer had scheduled a family meeting at the downtown notary office, the same place he intended to use for the forged signature. He thought he still held some kind of power thought. I was just the bruised stepdaughter, too scared to fight back. He didn't know that every corner of that office had already been swept with legal force. By the time we arrived, my father had already positioned two of his attorneys, the lead investigator, and two uniformed officers standing casually in the lobby, pretending to be just another pair of faces in the room. I sat between Helen Park and Miles. My bandages had been removed, but the yellow bruises along my cheekbone told their own story. People looked at me differently now, with the kind of quiet attention they give someone who's just survived a fire. Robert arrived 5 minutes late, his usual swagger slightly forced. Derek trailed behind him in a leather jacket, hands shoved into his pockets. My mother came last, pale and nervous, clutching her purse like it might save her. Robert's lawyer, Charles Denton, was already waiting at the table, though his face was pale too. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know how bad it would be. Amelia Robert said smoothly, as if we were about to share a family dinner. Glad you could make it. We can finally put this behind us like adults. I didn't answer. My father did. He stood just behind my chair, silent but towering. His presence alone sucked the air out of the room. Robert sat across from me, leaning forward like a predator playing nice. "No need to make a big deal out of this," he said. "We all know what's best for the family. Derek will take over the deed. You'll get to stay if you want everyone's happy." Derek smirked like a kid who thought he'd already won. My mother wouldn't look at me. Helen folded her hands calmly on the table. "Mr. Kane," she said, "before you start, there's something you should know." Robert raised a brow. "And what's that?" "Everything you've done for the past 6 months. Helen said we already know about it." The words landed like a punch. Denton shifted in his chair. Robert's mouth tightened. My father stepped forward, then setting a single black folder on the table. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. "Do you know what's inside?" he asked quietly. "What?" Robert sneered. "More empty threats. I've heard them before." My father's voice was calm and sharp. "Evidence." He flipped the folder open with 2 fingers. Inside were still images of security footage, time-stamped emails, financial transactions, printed transcripts of phone calls. Everything. This is every payment you made to Denton to forge the documents. Every wire transfer to the clerk who was supposed to process it. Every conversation where you said you'd make my daughter sign if she didn't agree. Derek's smirk disappeared like someone blew out a candle. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Denton looked at the photos like they were loaded guns. Robert tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. "This doesn't prove anything he said." "You think you can scare me with some screenshots?" Helen smiled, polite and deadly. "Screenshots and sworn statements from 2 neighbors who saw you leave the building with blood on your hands. Plus the audio of your phone call with Denton. She'll sign. If she doesn't, I'll make her sign." "Ring any bells?" The color drained from his face. My father leaned on the table slightly, his eyes never leaving Robert's. "You thought you were clever, but you left a trail. And I built my name on destroying men who leave trails." Robert slammed a hand on the table, but the sound was hollow now. Derek shifted uncomfortably beside him. "You think this will hold in court?" Robert barked. "Yes," Helen replied simply. "It already has. Everything has been filed with the district attorney's office. You're not here to negotiate, Mr. Kane. You're here to watch everything you built burn down." For the first time, Robert didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man standing in the center of a crumbling house. My father glanced at the officers by the door, and one of them nodded. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from something that had been waiting inside me for years. Justice, the kind that doesn't need to scream. The officer stepped forward. "Robert Kane." His voice echoed through the room. "You're under arrest for assault forgery and attempted fraud." My mother gasped. Derek's eyes went wide. Robert shot to his feet, his chair scraping across the floor. "You can't do this," he growled. "Actually," Helen said, closing the folder we already did. The officers moved quickly. One cuffed his hands while the other read him his rights. Robert jerked his shoulders, trying to resist, but it only made him look smaller. Derek stood frozen in place, watching his father figure be led away in handcuffs. My mother finally turned toward me, tears streaking down her face. "Amelia," she whispered, "please, stop this." My laugh was quiet and cold. "You stopped it, Mom, the night you watched him hit me and said nothing." She flinched like the words hit harder than his fists ever could. Robert barked something at her on the way out. Something half snarled, but the sound was drowned by the clink of the cuffs. The doors closed behind him, and for the first time, the room felt like it could breathe again. Derek finally moved, slamming his fist against the table. "You think this is over?" My father's voice was soft but lethal. "For him, yes. For you, it depends on how loud you want to be." Derek's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Helen handed him a copy of the restraining order like it was an afterthought. "You're barred from the property, effective immediately." Derek snatched the paper, his face twisting in frustration, then stormed out of the room. My mother stayed. She sank into the chair across from me, her shoulders shaking. "Amelia," she whispered again, as if the word itself might undo what she'd done. "He said it was for the family. He said we'd be okay." I stared at her for a long time. The woman who gave birth to me. The woman who handed me over to a wolf and called it love. "You chose him," I said finally. "Every day. You chose him over me. And now you get to live with it." She reached across the table, but I leaned back. Her hand hung in the air, trembling. My father stepped beside me, silent but steady. She looked at him, maybe hoping for mercy, but my father had none left for her. "You're done here, Linda," he said coldly. "You made your decision years ago." She broke then. The tears came hard, ugly, loud, but it wasn't the sound of regret for what she'd done to me. It was the sound of someone who had just realized the castle she built was made of sand. I stood slowly, the brass key warm against my chest, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the sky was gray, a storm building above the city. My father walked beside me, hands in his coat pockets, calm as always. "It's over," I said softly. "No," he answered. "It's just beginning. Public exposure is the first step. Now he's going to watch everything fall." The press had already started gathering. Someone had leaked the arrest to the media. Flashes went off as we stepped onto the street. I didn't flinch. For years, I had been silent, trapped inside walls that didn't feel like mine. Now everyone would see exactly who Robert Kane was. And for once, I wasn't the one hiding. Robert Kane's fall didn't happen in a single night. It came in waves, deliberate and relentless, like my father had orchestrated every crack in the foundation long before Robert ever thought of touching what was mine. His arrest had been the first blow, a clean and public strike. But the real damage came afterward in the cold light of the following days. I watched it unfold from my father's office, seated in the same leather chair where I used to sit when I was a kid, and he'd bring me there on weekends. Back then, his voice meant safety. Now it meant precision and power. His legal team filled the room with quiet efficiency. Helen Park stood by the window with her arms folded, reading through updates on her phone, while Miles typed furiously on his laptop. Victor, the investigator, moved like a ghost, dropping evidence where it mattered, pulling strings no one else even saw. My father stood near the glass wall overlooking the skyline. "He's losing everything," Helen said, finally her tone crisp. "Denton flipped this morning. He turned over every document Robert gave him. Signed statement, timeline, emails. We now have enough evidence to bury him in court before he even sees a trial date." My father didn't turn from the window. "Good." Miles spoke next without looking up. "The DA's office is fast-tracking the charges. Forgery, attempted fraud, assault, witness intimidation. With Denton cooperating, they don't need a long investigation. He's not just looking at jail time. He's looking at losing everything he owns. I didn't say anything at first. I sat quietly, my fingers brushing the small brass key around my neck. For years, Robert had made me feel small inside my own home, but now it was his turn to be cornered, stripped of the power he'd stolen with lies and threats. Victor placed a manila envelope on the table. "His accounts are frozen," he said simply. "Every shell company traced back to him has been seized. He can't touch a cent, and the bank just foreclosed on the condo he was hiding downtown. Without access to funds, his legal options shrink fast." My father finally turned his expression unreadable, but his eyes like steel. "What about the press?" Helen smiled thinly. "The press loves a rich man who falls, especially one who thinks he's smarter than the law. Every paper from here to the coast has picked it up. Businessman Robert Kane arrested in property fraud and assault investigation." It's everywhere. The weight of those words sank in slowly. For years, he'd strutted around like no one could touch him, like the world bent to his will. Now his face was on every news cycle, every website, every channel. The Predator had become a headline. My mother hadn't called since that day at the notary. Derek had vanished into whatever hole spoiled boys crawl into when their world collapses. And Robert was sitting somewhere in a cold cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit, wondering how everything went wrong so fast. I exhaled slowly, a shaky kind of relief creeping into my lungs. My father came to stand beside me. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "He will lose everything. Then he will have to live with knowing he lost it to the girl he tried to erase." There was something both brutal and comforting in his voice. The following week was a blur of hearings and filings. Robert's arraignment was televised. I didn't go in person, but I watched from my father's office. There he was, in cuffs, standing in front of a judge with slumped shoulders and no trace of the arrogance that used to fill our living room. He pled not guilty, of course. Men like him always do. But the evidence was a mountain, and he didn't have the money or the lawyers to climb it anymore. Denton's statement hit him like a hammer. The clerk who took the bribes flipped next. Even Derek's phone messages became evidence. He had sent his friends screenshots of the transfer paperwork like some kind of trophy. All of it was laid bare in court. I watched the judge deny his bail request. The camera zoomed in on his face as the reality set in. For the first time, I saw him look small. A man who had built his entire life on control was now powerless. The next blow came from the IRS. Victor handed my father another thick envelope one afternoon. "He's been hiding income for years," Victor said simply. "Now that the shell companies are exposed, so is everything else. He's looking at prison time, even without the assault charge." Helen nodded. "His reputation's gone. His business partners are cutting ties left and right. He's toxic now." I sat there listening, not because I was enjoying his destruction, but because for years I had carried the weight of being powerless. Now every file, every headline, every new piece of evidence was a brick taken off my chest. My mother finally appeared 3 days later. She showed up at my father's office uninvited, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Her hands shook as she clutched her bag. "Amelia," she whispered when she saw me. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying for days. "I didn't know it would come to this. My father didn't let her get closer." He stood between us, arms folded. "You knew enough," he said coldly. "You chose him. You watched him hurt her." I was scared, she said, her eyes flicking between us. "Robert, he can be dangerous. I thought if I just kept the peace." I cut her off. "You didn't keep the peace. You helped him." She flinched like I'd struck her. "I didn't mean to, but you did." I said, "Every time you stayed silent, you handed him another piece of me." She started crying, then soft and quiet at first, then louder. But it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like loss. She had lost her safety net, her image, her family. And now she was standing in front of the people she abandoned, begging for something she didn't deserve. My father's voice was quiet, but merciless. "You should leave." She looked at me like I might save her, but I didn't. She walked out of that office without looking back. Derek was next. He tried calling me once. I let it ring. I didn't owe him anything. By the second week, Robert's world had completely imploded. His accounts remained frozen. His house seized. His lawyer flipped. His face plastered everywhere as a fraud and an abuser. The court hearings were lined with reporters, and the story was no longer just about me or the penthouse. It became a symbol. Another man who thought wealth and intimidation made him untouchable, brought down by the one person he thought was weak. Me. I went to the courthouse the day the DA's office formally added the new charges. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. Robert was brought in wearing a beige jumpsuit shackled at the wrists. His hair, once perfectly styled, was a mess. His face pale. When his eyes met mine, there was no anger this time. Only something else. Fear. The judge read the charges. Assault, fraud, forgery, attempted coercion, tax evasion. His lawyer asked for leniency. The judge didn't grant it. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My silence was enough. Afterward, as we walked down the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed us. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones shoved forward. My father shielded me with one arm, Helen, on the other side. Someone shouted, "Amelia, how does it feel seeing him like this?" I paused for a brief moment. "It feels like the truth finally caught up to him," I said, then walked away. It wasn't triumph. It was justice. Slow, methodical, and inevitable. Back at the penthouse that night, I stood alone in the living room. It was quiet. No Robert. No Derek. No mother pretending everything was fine. Just me and the walls that had been mine all along. I touched the brass key at my neck and exhaled. The nightmare had started here, but it would end here too. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. After the storm, the quiet felt almost foreign. For months, my life had been filled with police reports, lawyer meetings, hospital visits, and the relentless drumbeat of Robert Kane's empire falling apart. Now there was only stillness. The kind that hangs in the air after a house fire when everything is standing but changed forever. I moved back into the penthouse a week after the final court hearing. The building hadn't changed, but I had. The doorman greeted me differently, a little softer, a little more careful, like the entire world had heard the story. And in a way, they had. My bruises had faded to the last shadows of yellow and green, faint reminders of the night everything broke. The penthouse door clicked open with the same brass key my father had given me when I was 10. For the first time in years, walking through it didn't feel like stepping into enemy territory. It felt like home again. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh paint. My father had sent in a cleaning crew and repaired the broken glass table. The bloodstains on the floor had been scrubbed away, but a small hairline crack remained in one corner of the marble where my head had hit. I didn't want it fixed. It wasn't an eyesore anymore. It was a reminder. This is where it happened, and this is where it ended. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the city lights through the wall of glass. For years, those lights had felt like they belonged to someone else, like I was just borrowing the view, but not anymore. This was mine again. My father showed up that night unannounced as always. He never knocked. He stepped inside in his black overcoat, a man who had just quietly dismantled another predator and didn't need to brag about it. He handed me a simple envelope. "It's official," he said. "The deed is back in your name, permanently. No one can touch it again." I opened it carefully. Inside was the property deed stamped notarized and pristine. My name sat at the top in bold letters. I traced the ink with my fingertips like it might disappear if I blinked too fast. "Thank you," I said softly. My father didn't smile, but there was something gentler in his eyes than I'd seen in years. "You don't need to thank me. This should have never been a fight in the first place." He walked toward the balcony and looked out over the city. "He thought he could win because he thought you were alone." I followed his gaze. "I was alone," I said quietly, "until you came back." He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize for the years he wasn't around. He just nodded once. That was how my father loved, not with flowers, with walls that don't fall. I poured us both a glass of water and we stood on the balcony together. Below us, the city moved like nothing had happened, but everything had. Robert's trial was set. Derek had disappeared from the headlines, stripped of the life he thought was waiting for him. My mother was still living in the old house alone now, facing a reality she had chosen for herself. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she begged me at the notary, and I didn't plan to. Some wounds don't get closed with apologies, they just scar over. My father broke the silence first. You should install private security, just in case. I gave a small nod. He had already arranged it, I was sure. He always did. I'll take care of it, I said. Good, he replied. And Amelia. I turned to look at him. Never apologize for taking back what was already yours. That night after he left, I walked through every room of the penthouse. The kitchen where Derek used to throw his late-night parties. The hallway where my mother would scold me for making noise when Robert was working. The living room where the glass had shattered. Every corner carried a ghost, but the thing about ghosts is they fade when you stop giving them a home. I opened the balcony doors and let the wind pour through. It was cold, but it was clean, free. I thought about everything that had happened since that night. About Robert's face when the evidence hit him. About Derek's fury when he realized his golden inheritance had vanished. About my mother's tears when she finally understood she'd backed the wrong man. And I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who flinched every time Robert raised his voice, the one who thought silence was the safest way to survive. She was gone. I wasn't that girl anymore. A few days later, I met Helen and Miles for coffee. They were officially off the case now, but they had become part of the strange little circle of people who had helped me reclaim my life. You know, Helen said with a faint smile, stirring her drink, you could sue him for damages. Civil court, emotional distress. You'd win easily. I shook my head. I don't need more money. I just need my life back. Miles raised a brow. Then that's exactly what you'll have. We toasted quietly to nothing and everything. When I walked home that night, the sky above the city was clear. No storm clouds, no sirens. Just stars. I took the long way back, passing the block where the ambulance had stopped the night Robert hit me. The air didn't feel heavy anymore, just sharp and cold against my skin, reminding me I was still here, still standing. At the elevator, the doorman nodded at me with something like respect. I nodded back. In the elevator's mirrored walls, I saw myself clearly. Not broken, not afraid, just me. In my living room, the envelope still sat on the table, my name gleaming under the lamp. I pressed the key against my collarbone and exhaled slowly. The storm had passed, and what was left was mine. Not borrowed, not negotiated, mine. Rebuilding didn't happen in a single sweeping moment of triumph. It happened slowly in small, quiet steps that no one applauded. In the weeks after Robert's fall, my life felt both strangely unfamiliar and deeply mine. The penthouse became a sanctuary again, though it had never felt so quiet before. No Derek blasting music in the living room. No Robert slamming doors. No whispers from my mother trying to smooth over his rage. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the soft echo of my footsteps. I started with the smallest thing I could control. I replaced the old locks. Not because anyone could still get in, but because I wanted to reclaim every inch of the space. Watching the locksmith install the new system felt like a quiet ceremony, an invisible line drawn between the past and everything after. The next change was security. My father had been right. A private team took over the building's surveillance quietly and efficiently. They didn't hover, they didn't interfere, they just made the walls feel safe again. One of the guards, an older man named Caleb, nodded at me every morning when I left for work. There was something grounding about that. The world wasn't dangerous anymore. It was just a world. I started sleeping through the night again. No jolting awake to imaginary footsteps. No replaying the sound of shattering glass. The first morning I woke up without that heaviness pressing against my chest. I just lay there and stared at the ceiling. It was quiet. And it was enough. My father visited often. Not to smother, not to control, just to be present in his own way. Sometimes he brought coffee and we sat on the balcony without saying much. Sometimes he brought files from work and spread them across the dining table like old times, and I read while he worked. One night he handed me a set of documents. Investment options, he said simply. You can do what you want with the penthouse. Keep it, expand, rent the lower floor. It's your choice. That was the difference with him. He gave me choices. Robert had only ever given me orders. I spent hours looking through those papers, not because I needed more money, but because it was the first time I could decide something without fear. I kept the penthouse as it was, untouched, mine. A few weeks later, I met with a therapist. It wasn't my idea at first. Helen had suggested it after everything ended. The body remembers what the mind tries to bury, she'd said. She wasn't wrong. Therapy wasn't easy. It was a battlefield without fists or glass shards. Sitting in that small office, I had to say out loud things I had spent years pretending didn't happen. The night Robert hit me, the way my mother looked away, the way Derek laughed like it was all a game, and underneath all of that, the way I felt like a guest in the home that was mine. My therapist didn't offer empty words. She just listened and asked questions that burned. Week by week, something inside me loosened. Not everything healed, but I learned to breathe without holding on to the past like it was the only thing that defined me. One day, after a long session, she asked, "Do you ever think about forgiving your mother?" I stared at the floor for a long time. "Forgiveness doesn't mean letting her back in," I said finally. "It means not letting her live in my head anymore." And that was enough. Derek tried to contact me twice through mutual acquaintances. I didn't answer. My mother sent one letter. I didn't open it. Not out of hatred, but because I didn't need to. I didn't owe her closure. Some people earn their silence. My focus shifted back to my life. Work, friends, the little rituals I had abandoned while living under someone else's control. I hosted my first dinner party in years. Just 4 close friends, candles on the table, warm pasta on real plates, laughter echoing through the walls that once only knew fear. At one point in the night, I caught myself smiling for no reason just because I could. It wasn't a loud, triumphant smile. It was quiet and real, and it felt like a kind of freedom. My father came by the next morning. He walked through the living room, his sharp eyes taking in the clean glasses and plates. "Looks like you had company," he said. I did. He nodded once. Good. We ended up on the balcony, coffee cups in hand. The city stretched out below, glittering in the cold morning sun. It wasn't just a skyline anymore. It was the view of a future I had built out of what they tried to take from me. My father broke the silence after a while. "You've always been stronger than they ever knew." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. "I know," I said quietly. Rebuilding wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about building something better on top of it, a foundation no one could shake again. I enrolled in an interior design course, something I had always wanted to do, but never allowed myself to dream of. I spent evenings sketching, imagining changes I might make to the penthouse, not because it needed them, but because now I could. I had time. I had space. I had power over my own life. I changed the curtains, repainted the guest room, filled the shelves with books instead of the trophies Derek used to display like they belonged to him. Slowly, brick by brick, memory by memory, the house became mine in more than name. One evening, I sat on the balcony alone, the same way I had the night after Robert's arrest. But this time, there was no fear sitting beside me. Only peace. The city moved on below me, but so had I. When the wind brushed against my hair, I touched the brass key at my neck. It didn't feel like a weight anymore. It felt like a promise. Not the kind someone gives you, the kind you give yourself. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had already won. Not in court, not in headlines, but here in the quiet life they tried to take away from me. I had rebuilt, and this time the walls would not fall. There is a moment after every storm when the world exhales, when the wreckage stops being loud and simply exists as proof that something survived. That's where I am now. Standing on the balcony of my penthouse, the one they tried to steal, looking out at the city lights that no longer feel like a cage. They feel like mine. My name is Amelia Carter, and I am still here. I have learned that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the people who are supposed to protect you. It doesn't just break your bones, it breaks your sense of what's safe, what's real, what's yours. But what they don't tell you is that pain, like that, doesn't destroy you. It changes you. The night Robert hit me was the night the old version of me died. The girl who stayed silent, who thought keeping the peace was safer than standing alone. I remember the sound of the glass shattering against my head. I remember my mother's voice, cold and small, telling me I should have signed. And I remember lying on the floor, the world spinning, thinking this is how people disappear. But I didn't disappear. I got back up, slowly, quietly, and I burned their entire plan to the ground. Robert thought power lived in his hands. Derek thought entitlement was ownership. My mother thought silence would save her. But power isn't in threats or signatures. It's in surviving long enough to reclaim what they thought was theirs. My father's voice still echoes in my mind from the day he handed me the deed back. Never apologize for taking back what was already yours. He was right. I stopped apologizing. I stopped explaining. I stopped shrinking myself to make room for other people's greed. I look around my home now and see the cracks that will never fully disappear. The faint line in the marble, the balcony railing where I once leaned in the dark, wondering if the house would ever feel like mine again. Those cracks don't hurt anymore. They remind me that everything they broke I rebuilt. Stronger, colder, sharper. The press stopped calling months ago. Robert's name faded from the headlines as other scandals took his place. But I remember. I remember every bruise, every whispered insult, every night I felt like a stranger in my own life. Not because I want to stay angry, but because forgetting would mean giving them a piece of my story. And they don't get that anymore. Sometimes late at night, I catch myself thinking about my mother. I wonder if she regrets it or if she just regrets losing. I haven't opened her letter. I don't need to. She made her choice, and so did I. I think about Derek, too, the smug grin he wore every time he told me the penthouse would be his one day. I imagine that grin disappearing when he learned the court barred him from stepping within 2 blocks of this building. His silence is the best apology I'll ever get from him. And Robert sitting in a cell somewhere, stripped of his fortune, stripped of his power, stripped of the control he loved so much. He wanted to take my home. He ended up losing his. That's what happens when predators mistake kindness for weakness. But this story isn't just about revenge, it's about surviving. It's about realizing that even when the people closest to you turn into enemies, you can still rebuild. It's about not letting them define the ending. For years, I thought family meant blood. I thought it meant sacrificing parts of myself to keep the illusion intact. But family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when everyone else is too busy trying to erase you. My father showed up. He didn't just fight for me. He reminded me I was worth fighting for. And slowly, painfully, I started to believe that too. I touched the brass key at my neck, the same one he gave me when I was 10. It used to feel like a promise someone else made to me. Now it feels like a promise I make to myself. I will never let anyone take what's mine again. I will never be silent again. I will never believe I have to choose between peace and dignity. I can have both. I already do. Some nights I walk through the living room barefoot, feeling the cool marble under my feet, breathing in the soft quiet that used to feel terrifying. It doesn't anymore. It feels earned. Every inch of this home has been touched by their cruelty and then reclaimed by my strength. That is my victory, not their destruction, my survival, my power. To anyone who's ever felt trapped by the people who are supposed to love them, I want you to hear this. You are not powerless. They want you to believe you are because it keeps you quiet. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet can be the sound of someone gathering their strength. Quiet can be the beginning of their downfall. I didn't fight with fists. I fought with proof, with truth, with the kind of patience predators never see coming. And when the moment came, I didn't scream. I stood. And that was enough. If your story looks anything like mine, if your wounds are carved by the hands of the people who should have protected you, know this: they don't get to write your ending. You do. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is not, "I'm okay," or "I forgive you." Sometimes it's just, "I'm still here." I am Amelia Carter. My stepfather hit me to steal my home. My half-brother laughed. My mother turned away. And they lost. I didn't. I rebuilt. I survived. And I'm still here. If you've ever had your voice stolen by the people closest to you, share your story. Somewhere out there, someone needs to know they're not alone. Someone needs to know that survival isn't a fairy tale. It's real, it's messy, and it's yours. Don't let anyone tell you your pain doesn't matter. Don't let anyone make you small. Speak it, own it, reclaim it, because the world may have tried to silence you, but they don't get the final word. You do. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever fought your way back from betrayal, I want to hear it. Share it in the comments. Let your voice echo louder than their silence. And if you're still in the middle of your storm, hold on. The quiet after doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means you survived it. And that matters. Thank you for listening. Thank you for standing with me. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like mine. Not just stories of pain, stories of survival, stories of people who refused to disappear, like me. If you're still watching right now, I want you to know something. This story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever been cornered in their own home, silenced by the people who should have protected them and told their voice didn't matter. If you've ever felt that kind of betrayal, then you already understand the weight I carried. But here's the truth I need you to hear. Pain doesn't get the final word. You do. Maybe your story looks different. Maybe your storm hasn't passed yet. Maybe you're standing in the middle of it, surrounded by the people who say they love you but cut you the deepest. Maybe you've been quiet for so long that silence started to feel like safety. I've been there. I know how heavy that quiet can be. But silence doesn't mean defeat. It's the breath before the rise. You matter. Your voice matters. And no one gets to rewrite your story except you. If this story lit a spark inside you, if it reminded you of something you've survived or something you're still fighting through, I want you to share it. Not because it fixes everything, but because it connects us. When one person speaks, someone else remembers they're not alone. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what moment in this story echoed in your bones. Tell me the part that made you say, "That was me once." And if you're not ready to talk, that's okay too. Just know you're seen, you're heard, and you're stronger than they ever wanted you to believe. This channel isn't just for stories. It's for survivors. For people who rebuilt their lives after someone tried to break them. For people who are still standing. For people like you. So if this story found its way to you tonight, maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was the reminder you needed to take one more breath, one more step, one more stand. Like I did. Like so many of us have. So here's my invitation to you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Like it if you've ever had to fight for what was yours. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories from people who refused to disappear, because this is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of a community built on truth, survival, and strength, and the next voice we need might be yours. Don't let silence protect them anymore. Speak, stand, be heard, because you're still here too.